You're listening to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. Now here's your host, Fran Duffy.
That's right. Another week and the road trip wages on as the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade, continues. I'm Fran Duffy, and I think we've got a great show for you here on episode number 213. At the top of this week's show, we've got Chalk Talk, where I chat with Greg Cosell about what we saw on film from the Eagles' loss to the Dallas Cowboys on the road on Sunday Night Football. We'll cover everything from that divisional loss, the second in a row for the Eagles, as we now prepare for this weekend's matchup against the Buffalo Bills, the 5-1 Buffalo Bills. We've got a lot to talk about when these two teams take the field at Ralph Wilson Stadium on Sunday. After that, we will take a look at my notes on Tre'davious White, the star corner, one of the best corners in the National Football League. I'll get through my notes on him coming out of LSU a few years ago, a guy I was a big fan of. If you were a listener to the Journey to the Draft podcast, you may remember how much I talked about Trey White in the build-up to that draft. But let's not waste any more time. Let's get into it now with Chalk Talk with Greg Cosell.
Let's get down to business. It's time for Chalk Talk.
Well, back again for another episode of Chalk Talk is the man himself, NFL Film senior producer Greg Cosell. Greg, tough one. Obviously a tough one to watch Sunday night, and then a tough one to watch again Monday morning. I think before we just had it wasn't a good game.
No,
obviously on all three sides.
It's hard to put a real positive spin on this game.
There aren't a lot of positive spins to take on it. I think there are things you can take away that we'll discuss, but there's not a lot that you can say in this game. Like, man, you know what, the run defense was really good in this game, or the coverage was locked down and the pass rush was consistently great. The run game was great on offense. Everything. I mean, look, I think it's a Jim Schwartz quote. Jim Schwartz will say that. I guarantee we're shooting this Monday night. Jim Schwartz speaks, is it tomorrow or Wednesday? He's going to say, "Hey, look, because he's going to get asked about it. The defense. He's going to say, look, I think we rush the passer like a 3-4 team. We cover like a 3-4 team. We tackle like a 3-4 team."
Well, Jim's a pretty honest guy.
Yeah, you are what your record says you are.
Right.
I think that's what you have to say about this game.
I think, and again, we're not going to sugarcoat anything about the game, but I think when you look at the reality of two road losses that were not overly competitive, you have to start, I think, looking ahead. You have to start trying to figure out how you can get better and look ahead and use the losses to try to do that.
Yeah, I think that's been a consistent theme for this Eagles team over the last 2 years, has been the ability to overcome adversity.
And be resilient.
Right. You go back 2 years ago, all those injuries, and, and you go on the Super Bowl run. Right. Last year, you had a stretch like this where you did not play good football for about 3-4 weeks.
Right.
They did not play really well last year, and you're able to turn it around and bounce back and go on a playoff run. That's what you have to hang your hat on, is say that this team has the ability to do that. They've shown it, but now they have to go and do it. It's not just going to happen. It's not going to just say all right, we're just going to turn it on. That's not how it works. So I think ultimately, you can't go into a hostile environment, turn the ball over twice in your two opening drives,
your first two possessions,
and give them 14 points inside your 30-yard line. You can't win a game like that.
No, especially when the approach was clearly an aggressive approach, taking the ball as opposed to deferring, saying, hey, you know what? We're putting faith in our offense. We're going to march down the field. We're going to score, and we're going to set the tempo with our offense.
Yep.
And then, obviously, the fumble by Goddard.
The tempo went the other way.
Right.
Yeah.
It exactly went the other way.
Yeah. So I think really ultimately, it was a tough start once again, and then they're unable to kind of get out of that hole. A couple times they were able to make it close. I think in the first half you get back, it's 14-7,
right?
And you have that drive where the big one. I know Doug was asked about it at his press conference on Monday. The 3rd and 4 run by Miles Sanders, where it was a tackle trap play. They brought Andre Dillard from the left side over. He was going to block the defensive tackle. Great play by the D tackle to kind of get across the face of Dillard. That took off that initial hole that the trap is supposed to hit. Sanders busts outside a little bit, and there was another hole there that
he needed to get through.
If he had stuck his foot in the ground and gotten through that,
he would have gotten a first down.
And he almost still got it. He got 3.
Right.
If he had hit that a little bit faster,
then
you're talking about a first down. And again, that's not the difference in the game, but you're talking about it at a 7-point game. Now you have to punt and score again.
And I think a team has to do this too, not just you and I sitting and talking about it. But I think you have to do two things. You have to look at individual plays and individual ways to make the play calls better and execute better. but then you have to look a little more macro and say, okay, how can we try to create some other things?
Yeah.
So you can always look at that 3rd and 4 play where there was a hole and say, hey, let's work on that as a specific coaching point. But that's one play.
Yep.
Now let's talk about how we can make a lot of things better.
Yep, and it's tough to do. A lot of Eagles fans will say, like, oh, well, they need to get into the film room and figure this out. They have to play a 5-1 Bills team this week.
Correct.
That's not a slouch. This isn't like a Fugazi 5-1. They're playing good football on both sides,
and they have a really good defense.
Yeah, we'll get into that matchup in a little bit. But if you can't just say, all right, we're going to take Monday and Tuesday. We're going to fix everything we've got. We'll worry about game planning.
Right.
That's why everything happens. The self-scouting really goes into high gear during the bye week when you don't have to worry about putting a game plan together. But there are little things you'll try and fix from week to week and try and coach up, and that's what they'll try and do this week, those little things. All right, so we got that out of the way. It was rough on both sides. Let's talk. There are a few things I want to hit you with here. Just kind of talk macro and then also micro as well. Andre Dillard, I want to start there. Made his first start.
Yes.
We saw him first long-term last week against Everson Griffin. Tough matchup, a guy that uses length, uses power. To me, that's a guy for where Andre Dillard is in terms of his physical development right now. That's a tough matchup. I was excited to see him this week against a guy in Robert Quinn who wins more with his feet, more with his quickness. He did one time get inside his pads and bull rush him back for a sack. But overall, I'd like to get your thoughts on what you thought from Andre Dillard in his debut.
Overall, I thought it was pretty solid. He had a few bad snaps, which you would expect.
No question.
Robert Quinn is a very difficult matchup. I guarantee that Dillard's never seen that kind of edge speed before.
Yeah.
And you can talk about it. You can prepare for it. We know the Eagles have a great O-line coach, but it's not the same as facing it at live speed in a game. And I think that for the most part, and of course Quinn got hurt, but for the most part, I thought that Dillard held up reasonably well. Dillard was not the reason that the offense did not play well.
Yeah.
A few bad snaps. You'd expect that. And when tackles have bad snaps and there's a sack, it becomes very visible.
Right.
But for the most part, I thought that he held up rather well. And given that he's played in 2 straight weeks against Everson Griffin and Robert Quinn, I think that's trial by fire. And I think both those opponents will really help him going forward.
I was having this conversation with somebody this weekend. What do you feel is the toughest position for a rookie outside of quarterback?
Right.
Couch that. What is the hardest position to come in as a rookie and be able to play? Even just not because we see rookies all over the league play. What's the toughest position for them to come in and kind of play it at a winning level? Because I couldn't decide between one of 2 spots.
Wow.
Tackle's one of them for me.
I think corner is one.
I think it's tackle and corner.
I think corner is without question a really difficult transition for a college player to come into the NFL. But I could easily, tackle would be right there for the simple reason that particularly in today's college football, for the most part, everything is quick. You're never in a 3-point stance. You're always in a 2-point stance. So, that's a really difficult transition as well, in my view.
Yeah, I think you almost can look at those 2 positions and kind of mirror them because, in both, you're kind of doing something unnatural. You're moving in reverse.
Right.
You're being threatened in ways by superior athletes more often than not. Maybe not always in Dillard's case because of how athletic he is, but guys that are typically more athletic, you're still going to be at sort of athletic
defensive
mismatch.
Ends. Edge pass rushers in the NFL are more athletic than Andre Dillard.
Yeah.
As athletic as he is for an offensive tackle, this is the NFL. The guys who rush the quarterback off the edge, with very, very few exceptions, are going to be more athletic than he is.
And I think that's usually the case with receivers going up against corners as well, for the most part.
Right.
That's why you see often in the NFL draft, teams take athletic projects on the offensive line and athletic projects at corner because you're trying to bet on those tools to level the playing field.
You're trying to coach those tools because not everybody has those tools.
Exactly.
Right.
So I watch, you browse around the NFL, obviously you watch all 32 teams every week. Rookie offensive linemen are giving up sacks Every single week.
Oh, without question.
Jajuan Taylor, a player I loved coming out of Florida.
He's having a real. And the thing is, it's funny you say that because I don't know how much you've seen of him. I've seen Jacksonville every week.
Yeah.
And he's giving up sacks in a way that a lot of people probably did not expect. He's getting bull rushed with speed to power, whereas everybody, including myself, and I think you felt the same way, believed that that was his strength.
Yep.
That his strength was his strength, as opposed to his quick feet.
Yeah.
And he's getting bull rushed because it comes down to technique.
Yep.
And the speed to power and the explosiveness of edge rushers. And I know he played in the SEC, but it's not the same as the NFL.
Yeah, and there were guys, I mean, I loved Michael Dieter out of Wisconsin. He's getting manhandled in Miami. There are guys up and down. I'm like, man, I really love that guy coming out. He's struggling
and that
this year.
doesn't mean these guys won't be good players.
No question.
Right.
That's life of a rookie offensive lineman in the NFL. So to see Andre Dillard come out the last 2 weeks, I think that he's looked pretty well.
I think the reports have been overly positive, to be honest.
Yeah. Couple of things from the offensive side before we move over to defense. I loved the idea that we're going to play a little bit more 21 personnel. We saw some more two-back stuff this week. Nothing crazy. Handful of snaps, including that touchdown to Dallas Goedert against Single High. So that brings them within a touchdown. They're down 14-0. And what they did was you had Jordan Howard and Miles Sanders in the shotgun next to Carson Wentz. They sent Howard
It was all
from
go
left
eight
to
seam.
right. It was the same play.
It was the same play that
the jet
Sanders
sweep.
scored a touchdown on last week that I broke down in the matchup show this week.
Yes.
It was the same play. They got what you get a lot with the Cowboys, with a lot of single high teams, they got cover 3 boundary lock. So when you get cover 3 boundary lock, what happens if you're going to take the over route, which is what Goddard ran, is the backside, the boundary hook to curl defender has to carry him because there's no one else to play him.
Yep.
And that was Van Der Esch, I believe.
It was Leighton Van Der Esch, yes.
And so you feel good about your athletic tight end running a vertical route against a linebacker. As athletic as Van Der Esch is, you still feel good about that.
Yep.
But it was the exact same, not the complementary routes weren't exactly the same as the Sanders touchdown the week before, but the concept was generally the same.
Exactly. And so Carson, do you feel like there was a read of the middle field safety, or do you think he was going to Goddard all the way to try and attack Van Der Esch on the backside?
I'm sure it was, I shouldn't say that.
Yeah.
I would think there'd be a read, but when he hit his back foot and was basically ready to do something with the ball,
right.
Sanders was not in position for the H-seam throw to be made.
So for a timing standpoint,
from
it
a
looked
timing
more like it was going to
standpoint, Goddard made far more sense.
Interesting.
Because don't forget, Sanders comes from the backfield, so that throw takes a little longer.
Yeah.
You have to sit in the pocket a little more. Goddard's on the line of scrimmage, so he's the much more immediate vertical threat.
And keep in mind, if you're the free safety for the Cowboys, if you're the linebackers for the Cowboys, you've seen the Eagles run this concept so many times, you're expecting this is going to Sanders.
Right.
They've thrown this 5 times in the last 4 weeks.
Carson did look toward Sanders initially, which, so again, only Carson could tell you what was in his mind.
Yep.
But yeah, as soon as I saw the play, I said to the guys in our matchup room, I said, oh, that's all go H-seam. Same call as they've the week before.
Yeah.
Which we've seen them run over the years too.
Yeah.
I remember I don't remember if we broke it down, but they did one to Wendell Smallwood a few years ago.
Last year against
was
the
it
Colts,
last year?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the Jaguars,
which was not a touchdown, as I recall.
It was not.
But no, that's part of the repertoire.
Yeah. Let's talk about the defensive side now. And I think, look, the thing that was uncharacteristic was obviously the run defense. Missed tackles abound. That was certainly an issue. Getting 2 sudden change situations inside your own 30-yard line, not an ideal way to start for that side. But missed tackles, a lot of yardage on the ground. I want to ask you, though, about Jalen Mills, who made his debut first game back after a year. What'd you think about the Green Goblin and his return?
It's funny you ask because he didn't show up to me a lot.
Okay.
So, and I wasn't watching him on every play.
Gotcha.
So I guess that would mean to me that he probably did okay. So like I said, I wasn't, studying him on every play.
I was interested to see what he would look like.
The guys I was studying more on every play because I was maybe just more interested. Because I feel like I know what Jalen Mills is. I don't think he's going to be a different player than he's been.
Well, just having not played for a calendar year, I wanted to see, how does he look?
What did you think?
I thought he looked fine.
Yeah.
Honestly, the one play down the right sideline to Amari Cooper, Cooper made a great catch. It was a great ball. I thought the coverage was pretty good.
Yes, that was the best throw of the night by Prescott. Yeah. You couldn't throw that ball any better.
Yeah, I thought the coverage was pretty good.
And that was a trust thing. That just shows you the trust that Prescott has with Cooper, because he turned that loose when Mills was on top of Cooper.
Yep.
So that was a trust throw. And I'm not sure you could blame that on Jalen Mills.
Sure, no. And the interception he made down the field actually was interesting.
Showed some good recovery on that.
Good recovery, good ball skills, and also he was the only corner on the field. They were playing with a very heavy package, 4 down linemen, 4 backers. So interesting that they had that level of trust, and had not played for a year, only 1 week of practice. There were one corner on the field. Jalen Mills is the one out there making the play, which I thought was really interesting. But you said that you were watching elsewhere.
I was watching T.J. Edwards.
Okay, what'd you think?
Well, it was funny on the second play of the game when he just came up and smacked Alawali.
I like that.
And then made the tackle. Other than that, I thought that struggled at times with his recognition and his eye discipline, but for the most part, I thought that given, you have to keep one thing in mind. And I'm not saying this is good or bad, because there are players who are free agents who become good players. But when the Eagles are in their base defense, you got to remember who they're putting out there. And it's no knock on anybody. It's just the reality of life in the NFL. They were playing with 2 free agents and a 5th-round pick who was a safety in college. That was their starting. The 3 starting linebackers in their base 4-3.
I think it was a 7th-round pick or 6th-round pick by New England before he got here. But yes, same point.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, and normally, look, as we say, there's always guys who make it who are late picks or free agents. Sure. But normally, and we spend so much time watching college players, guys get drafted where they get drafted or not drafted for a reason. So that's what the Eagles were putting out there in their base 4-3.
Yeah, and I think that you got to give a lot of credit to Dallas from a schematic standpoint. There were a few runs that I thought they did a really good job with their misdirection, attacking. Saying, okay, we're going to take these linebackers, put them in stressful situations. They stayed in a lot of 21, 22 personnel, stayed in base cut and keep the Eagles in base defense. They did a lot of different things where they pulled the fullback, and instead of him going to the right with the way of the run, he's going left to hold those backers and keep them just a step from getting outside.
And Matt Bowen, I give credit to him. He talked in our matchup show about the Cowboys getting outside with their GG scheme, pull scheme, which they did a lot of, and they were effective with it.
And the Eagles will see that this week.
They'll do it with their guard and their center. That is a major focus of the Bills' run game. And it's funny, they hadn't really done it with Frank Gore until this week. They had done it mostly with Devin Singletary, who's the more explosive back. But they did it with Gore this week, and I believe he ran for 11 yards.
Yeah, this is a team that's we're talking about Buffalo. We might as well just shift into this matchup now.
There's this past week's game,
and I think really, look, they're going to try and bounce back. We talked about it. There's not time to say, it's kind of wild and say, like, man, that was bad, because you have to get ready. You have to prepare for the next week. There's another game in 6 days now. So let's talk about this Buffalo Bills team. And offensively, from an identity standpoint, they are a physical football team. They want to outpower you.
They had a run play on their 98-yard drive, and I know you saw it. It was Gore's 15-yard run, where Feliciano and Ford doubled. I forget who. It might have been John Jenkins.
Yes.
And they pushed him back. I think they're still pushing him back, Fran, as we're speaking. I mean, they pushed him back into the linebacker McMillan. It was unbelievable. And they're a good run-blocking front.
He should have called for an Uber. He would have got there faster.
There you go. Hey, are you performing here all night?
I'll be here all night.
Okay,
Unfortunately, I'll be here until like 11:30. But
so you will be performing all night.
Exactly. I think when you look at that team, though, I mean, that's Quentin Spain. All he wants to do is put you on your back. That's a physical group up front. As I mentioned, they're a top 10, top 7 unit in the most rushing categories around the NFL. They want to be able to run the football. Frank Gore, Devin Singletary, Josh Allen, all
and
three
they
guys.
run it old school. They put Allen under center.
Yep.
They put Gore as an I back or Singletary as an I back.
Yep.
Yeah, do they have a few shotgun runs? Everybody does. But that's not the foundation of their run game. They put Allen under center, and they run the ball the old-fashioned way.
No question. Well, we're talking about the run game, so let's talk about some of these guys. So Frank Gore, I think we kind of know what Frank Gore is, but tell us about Frank Gore. Yes.
It's patience, vision, and always in his career, just an uncanny ability to get through small creases at the point of attack.
Yep.
I don't think I've ever seen a back, and again, I say that I've been doing this for 40 years, so maybe there is a back, but he's certainly right there, a back who can get through little pieces of daylight as well as Frank Gore.
Yeah, and I think when you look at Devin Singletary, the rookie,
explosive
back. The thing, he was a very polarizing player this spring because was so productive at FAU.
Yep.
Put up crazy numbers in that Lane Kiffin offense, but was really small, and he's still really small. That's not changing. Test scores,
but small in terms of height,
short and squatty.
I mean, he's not 180 pounds.
Yes,
he was over 200 pounds.
Yes, he was a bigger kid.
Yeah.
But then also didn't test well. And that's when a lot of people say, "Oh, you know what? I'm not. He's small and he's slow. I'm out on Singletary."
I remember because I thought watching his tape that he had some pretty good juice, and I don't think he ran a particularly good 40.
It was. I don't have it in front of me, but I want to say.
But it wasn't the kind of 40 where you went, "Wow,
he
can."
It was that scared a lot of people. But I think when you look at Singletary, he's got the ability to make people miss. He's got some juice, lateral movement.
See, he runs better than his 40 time.
Yes, no question.
On tape, for sure.
How does he fit in terms of this scheme? How do you see those two playing off each other, both Frank Gore and Singletary?
Well, I think Singletary fits because it gives them a little more of an outside run game. Plus, he's very good in the screen game.
Yep.
And so is Gore, but Singletary does give them a little more juice. So they've got two backs that can, I don't want to say be dominant, that's too strong a word, but they can be very effective within the context of how they want to play.
Yep, and Singletary's been banged up a little bit, so
but
they've
he's back
relied.
now.
Yeah, he's back now.
Yeah.
They have relied a little bit on TJ Yeldon, a back you and I both like coming out of Alabama.
Week.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I think ultimately it's Gore and Singletary.
Yeah, no, it's Singletary's a good player. I'll be interested to see him more up close this weekend in this game. Staying in the backfield, mentioned Josh Allen and what they do with him in the run game. They will do some design runs.
A lot of design runs.
He will scramble and take off.
Got to be careful about that.
They move the pocket. I mean, they do things. So
right.
His feet, much like what we talked about last week with Prescott, big part
they're
of
a
what
factor
they're
in the game for sure.
No question.
And I think Josh Allen is still at the point in his career where he doesn't necessarily see things as clearly as you hope he will. I think he runs the play as called, and if he doesn't feel like it's clear, he'll take off.
Yep.
So you have to be very aware of that. It's one thing to say, hey, let's confuse him with some looks and some disguises and some late movement, but if you're going to do that, you then have to be prepared for him to run.
Yep.
It's not as if he's just going to sit there and be confused. He's going to take off.
Yeah.
And he's a really good runner.
Yeah. No, I mean, he's very, very athletic, and he's a big, strong guy.
Yep.
Watching him, it's hard not to think of Cam Newton and that staff.
Yep.
Both a scouting staff and a coaching staff were in Carolina when Cam Newton was brought up and developed, and now they've got their own version there. In Josh Allen, and a guy that can make every throw in the book.
But he's a little scattershot. He'll miss throws too.
He's going to miss throws, both mentally and physically.
Yes.
So very similar to Newton in that way.
Yeah. And, I mean, you could see him on one throw, miss a throw badly, and on the next throw, just make an unbelievably great throw.
Yeah.
I mean, they had a 12-play, 98-yard touchdown drive this week, and he made two really good throws. He had that crosser to Duke Williams.
Yep.
Which is a combination route concept they run a lot of, where they run the double post and the crosser underneath it.
Yep.
You see that a lot with them.
Sure.
And he threw the crosser, which required touch and precise ball placement, and you couldn't have thrown it any better.
On the money. Yep.
And then obviously the touchdown to John Brown, who is he's someone the Eagles have to deal with because he can still run.
Yep.
He can get over the top of people. Now, the one thing about Josh Allen, which I'm sure they're working on, is he's missed a lot of deep balls to open receivers.
The deep ball accuracy, I want to say there was a stat I saw this weekend
It's
where
bad for him.
He was very, very low
It's
down the list.
bad for him.
Yeah.
And he misses badly.
Yeah.
It's not like, it's right off the fingertips.
Right.
He missed
He
one.
had one. Oh, man. It was
to Andre Roberts.
15 yards deep.
To Andre Roberts, who ran by the defense,
Yep.
and the safety sat, and he was wide open, and he threw it a good 10 yards over the top.
It was a rough one.
Yeah.
But I think when you look at this receiving core, they've tried to build it in his image. I mean, they went and say, all right, well, we're going to try and attack downfield. We're going to leverage his arm strength. And also the fact that we want to be a run team. We've talked about this with the Baltimore Ravens. Want to run the ball. All right, now we're going to hit you with play action.
Right.
That's the impact
and we
that
hope
John
we
Brown
get
can
single
have
high.
Yep.
And no question. And Cole Beasley's very good in the slot.
Yep.
Philadelphia
Eagles
fans know him from Dallas. And no, they're pretty solid.
They completely remade that tight end room from last year this year.
Yes.
So,
and I really like Dawson Knox.
So did I. I liked him coming out.
I loved him coming out.
Yep.
He didn't get a lot of balls at Ole Miss
He
because
didn't catch a touchdown.
I know. But I mean, they had Brown, they had Metcalf, and they had Lodge, and so he wasn't really a big factor in the passing game. So he was a guy that I had to watch. I even went back and watched him the year before just because I wanted to see plays.
Yeah.
I don't know if you probably did the same thing.
Yeah.
And I really liked him. I thought he was highly athletic, and I thought he had a chance to be a really good player.
Yeah.
And I still feel that way.
And he's used in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
He's not just a move guy. He will be, asked to be a blocker, and he will do a lot of the dirty work, lead blocking, split zone, a lot of those different things. He'll be asked to be a factor from that standpoint.
And it's funny you mentioned blocking. They have Lee Smith, who's essentially a glorified offensive tackle.
His tackle size,
Yeah, but he's good at it.
Yes.
And then Tyler Croft, who's unfortunately has been injured so much in his career. I remember him coming out of Rutgers, another athletic tight end.
I remember him coming out of high school, so I will one-up you there. He went to Downingtown East, I believe.
Ah, okay.
We recruited him when I was at Temple.
I did not know that.
He got that Rutgers offer.
You did one-up me there.
Yeah, so I will one-up you on that one.
But
Croft's a good player.
Yeah, and obviously he got injured, I think, in training camp. Then he came back, got injured again. So I think this past week was his first game, and I didn't check his snap count, but he certainly can become a factor for them because he's another guy that's pretty athletic.
Yeah, no, he's. When you look at that group as a whole, it's a good group.
It's a good group.
It's a good group. So linebackers and safeties for the Eagles got to be aware of all those guys, especially Knox in the passing game, because he's the guy that can get down the seam and be a factor.
As he did last week versus cover 2, I believe.
Yes. And it was that was a big time throw from Josh Allen right by the middle linebacker's ear hole in Tampa too. Just kind of browsing through really quick. To me, the offensive line is a really intriguing group because that's another group they really put a lot of assets into to say, okay, we're going to completely remake this. So Deion Dawkins, the Temple kids at left tackle, Quentin Spain. I mentioned he just wants to crush
it. And you know what? He struggled in Tennessee the last couple of years, which is why they let him go.
Right.
So I mean, I think he fits what they want to do, but theoretically he fit what Tennessee wanted to do, and he just didn't do that good a job.
Sure. And then Mitch Morse, the athletic center from Kansas City.
Good player.
Man, he looks good when he's a puller. He's a really
he was a
athletic
tackle
player.
in college.
He was, yes, I remember. At Missouri.
A left tackle, if I'm not
I
mistaken.
believe Doug Peterson was there when they drafted him in the second round as their offensive coordinator. So a guy that's got that position versatility, but his
and then
athleticism.
Feliciano. One
right
of my guys who works on the matchup show was at Miami the last 3-4 years.
Okay.
And he says a lot of good things about Feliciano. And he's
Interesting.
played well.
Yeah.
Now, he's a mauler, too.
Yep. At right tackle, Cody Ford.
Well,
they
they rotate.
Naseki is the other guy who's been a good swing tackle in this league for a long time. So it's a good group.
Ford's a good run blocker.
They're a very efficient team.
Yep.
Offensively, they're not going to score 40 points every week, but find
Josh
ways
Allen
to win the
is
game.
one of those guys.
Yep.
He can make some throws, and you just go, wow. Now, he can also, in any given game, probably be 15 for 32 with 3 picks.
Yep.
You just don't know.
Yeah. No, there's the strength. If you just look at it purely from a statistical standpoint, is the run game. What I found to be very interesting, their red zone offense is very, very good. Their touchdown efficiency when they get inside the 20, I think their passer rating as a team is number 1 in the NFL inside the 20. And it's not like, they've got these red zone weapons. They spread the ball around. They've got really good concepts.
Right.
So the Eagles have to be very aware that they want teams to get into the red zone.
Right.
The red zone defense is very good. That'll be an interesting matchup in this game.
And even though what you said doesn't speak to Josh Allen's running ability, you have to be aware of that in the red zone as well.
Oh, no question. Yeah, the 2-point play. He got into the end zone on the goal line. When it's goal line, short yardage.
Oh, no, they'll run design runs. They'll sweep him in the tight red zone.
You may be breaking down a quarterback sweep on Eagles game plan this week.
I may be?
A little bit of a tease.
Okay.
It might be. We haven't done it yet, so I can't say for sure, but I think that is in the plans. Let's go over to the defensive side because I think this Bills team is known for their defense with Sean McDermott. Give us a quick, for Eagles fans that, they may remember when he was the defensive coordinator here, maybe didn't follow him as much when he went to Carolina, and now he's the head coach.
Yep.
Give us the speech here on what his scheme is all about and what he kind of brings to the table.
Well, here's what I kind of wrote down, and I'm going to find it. But I watch them every week.
Yep.
So,
it's a fun team to watch defensively.
Yeah, I would say that they're an execution defense much more than a highly schemed defense.
Yep.
Okay? They're not a high percentage blitz defense. They almost exclusively match up to what the offensive personnel is, meaning if the offensive personnel is base, they're in base. If the offensive personnel is 11 with 3 wide receivers, they're in nickel. They're a 100% exclusive nickel defense. They do not play dime.
Yep.
Now, they mix and match some personnel packages quite a bit, and they've done that throughout the course of this season with a lot of different people. They were playing Neal, number 33, against 11 personnel, and kind of a big nickel that was geared toward 11 personnel. They were playing Marlowe as safety, same big nickel concept, when the other team had two tight ends on the field.
Love Dean Marlowe coming out of James Madison.
Yeah. This week they totally changed up, and they were missing Matt Milano, who I think is a really good player.
He's a good player,
and I don't know what his status is for this week.
Yep.
But this week they kind of went about it differently. They played base 4-3 because they made Maurice Alexander, who I remember coming out of Boise State, I believe, as a safety.
Yeah,
They've made him a linebacker.
Yep.
And so they played base 4-3.
Yep.
So they do a lot with some personnel, but as far as the concepts, they're a cover 4 team, a cover 3 team, and when they play man, they'll play cover 1, 2-man, 1 robber.
Yep.
So it's not as if they only play one thing, but they're more of an execution defense. And one thing that I think really, really helps them is they have interchangeable safeties in Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, who was once an Eagles draft choice and has gone on to become a really good safety.
I'll tell you what, the interception he made against the Giants in week
I remember
2 of this year.
Yeah.
You may be breaking that one down in Eagles game plan this week.
All right.
So when you look at this safety duo, very good group, and I was glad that you talked about them from a schematic standpoint as well, because I wanted to ask you, we talked last week about quarters coverage, because we broke it down.
Yep.
The Eagles gave up that play against Stephon Diggs, and we've got some reaction. It was like, well, why would they play quarters coverage? Well, the Bills have one of the best defenses in the NFL. They're not giving up any.
The Panthers play quarters coverage too all the time.
They have yet to give up a touchdown of 20+ in quarters.
Right.
By play being a primary quarters defense. Every coverage has strengths. Every coverage has weaknesses. So they're
if you play
a
the
quarters
coverage
team.
correctly,
Right.
Look. What people have to understand about zone, just a very quick aside, is every zone coverage is essentially designed for 3-step timing and 5-step timing by the quarterback. In other words, every zone coverage is designed for the ball to be out in 1.5 seconds or 2.1 seconds. Anything that goes beyond that is on the pass rush because then the holes in the coverage are there. So no zone coverage takes care of everything. It must work in tandem with a pass rush.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, as we've mentioned, every zone coverage has voids.
Yes.
So if you're going to play quarters coverage, which in theory has 4 deep defenders, that means you only have 3 underneath. So you're going to give up a little bit more underneath. If you want to play Tampa 2, you're going to have 5 underneath and only 2 deep. So there's math involved here,
right.
In terms of what you can cover and what you can take away.
And the key about zone coverages, and you hear this all the time, and I've been fortunate in my career to sit in defensive meetings with teams, and you hear this all the time. It's eye discipline.
Yep.
It's leverage. It's recognition.
And what is to take us through those 3 terms?
Well, eye discipline means you have to have if you're playing zone, you can't be staring at the quarterback.
Right.
You must understand the routes, and your eyes must be with the routes and the players who are coming into your area. As soon as you start looking at the quarterback, you lose focus on the routes. It's like a quarterback looking at the rush.
Right. Yep.
So you need to understand what kind of routes could be run from specific receiver splits, okay? And then leverage. Leverage comes from whether you're playing outside technique, inside technique. You have to play in a specific spot so you don't give up certain routes.
You have to understand where your help is at any given point, including the sideline.
Correct, because the sideline is help.
Yes.
And then recognition, it comes down to recognizing what the routes are.
Yeah.
Because every team runs essentially the same routes. It's just how they get to those routes.
Yep. We talked about it earlier with Dallas. Right. I mean, they see that route concept the Eagles have run with Miles Sanders going down the seam multiple times over the last few weeks. You naturally are going to say, this is what they're running. Now you've got Dallas Goedert going the other way, and that's a great play call by the Eagles to try and attack that scheme.
No question. So, but then there's also rules, and without getting too deep into it, in quarters, if you line up with 2 receivers to one side, the outside receiver is number 1, the inside receiver is number 2.
Yep.
So if you're playing quarters, the corner is responsible for number 1 running vertically.
Yep.
The safety, the quarter safety, is responsible for number 2 running vertically. But there's rules as to when the coverage those players have to match up and become man players.
Yep.
Some coaches say, hey, if number 2 runs vertical, you match up at 8 yards.
8 yards.
Some coaches say you match up at 12 yards.
Yep.
That becomes specific to a coach.
Yep, and without knowing how they're being coached from that, and also the different checks you may have.
I guarantee the Eagles know how Sean McDermott coaches it.
Right.
But we don't know all that.
We don't know. Yeah. We don't get that deep into the weeds on it. From a personnel standpoint, those 2 safeties, when you look at Poyer and Micah Hyde, interchangeable, great tacklers, very reliable tacklers with ball skills, kind of like that, the quote-unquote nose
really
for the
good
football.
tacklers and really good near the line of scrimmage in the run game.
Which you have to be in quarters. You have to, because you need those guys to come up and be able to play.
Really good near the line of scrimmage in the run game.
At corner, they've got Levi Wallace, who's
I think
an outstanding story.
He didn't have his best game this past week, but ever since he became the starter last year with maybe 6 or 7 games to go, he's played very well.
1-year starter at Alabama. If you haven't yet, I would urge you to go and make sure you go and just read up on his story, how he became an Alabama star. Fascinating. Really cool story in his background. Tre'davious White.
Really good player. Sometimes they use him as a matchup corner.
Yep.
Sometimes they don't. It depends on the opponent. Your guess is as good as mine how they see the Eagles.
Yeah.
He didn't match up last week to Devontae Parker, but he has matched up to big-time receivers in the past.
Yep.
So we'll see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And then they've got Teron Johnson, who typically had been their nickel.
They
and
did
then
a weird thing this week.
Yep.
You probably noticed it.
Yes.
Teron Johnson would play in their nickel on 1st and 2nd down, and Kevin Johnson came in and played slot corner on 3rd down.
Yeah, it seemed like when they went to that speed nickel package where they put Lorenzo Alexander
as a
and he
rusher.
would come down as a rusher.
They did that starting in the second half.
Yeah. That's what I was trying to pick when they would try and do that.
Yeah.
So let's get now to that front. And we'll go to the pass rush because Ed Oliver is the top 10 pick that I think a lot of people are interested to get your thoughts on. How you felt that he's played so far to start his career?
I think he struggled quite a bit. I thought he's had a few plays this week that makes me think maybe he's starting to turn the corner. But I think for the most part this year, he's been eaten up a lot by bigger bodies.
He gives up ground, yep.
He's 280 pounds now.
Yep.
And he's been eaten up a lot. He hasn't made many spectacular plays given his athleticism and sheer explosiveness. Saw a little of that this week, and like I said...
See that disruption upfield, and where maybe he doesn't make the play, but he allows somebody else to make that play.
Haven't seen a lot of that, but this week we saw some of it.
We saw a few of them, yeah.
Right. So I think he's a little bit of a work in progress. In fact, one could easily argue that Jordan Phillips, who is kind of the backup 3 technique, and I don't know what the exact ratio of snap counts are, but you could easily make the argument that Jordan Phillips has played better than Ed Oliver up to this point in the season.
Phillips,
the film tells you that. That's not an opinion.
No, and Phillips, we remember him coming out of Oklahoma a few years ago. But his
big man
talent,
with really light feet.
Yeah, I mean, he should have been a first-round pick. He fell.
I think he had some issues.
There was stuff there, and then he was in Miami last few years, leaves there, goes to Buffalo.
But he's played well, and particularly he's become a big factor because they lost Harrison Phillips.
Yes, correct.
Yes.
So you've got those two. Star Latulele is in at nose
tackle.
Still a
solid player.
Yep, solid player on the inside.
The only thing they're really lacking, and it's big, is Jerry Hughes can still rush the quarterback a little. They don't have really another pass rusher.
Right, yep. Yeah,
they're searching for one on the other side.
They drafted Shaq Lawson to be that guy
He's not
years
a pass
ago.
rusher.
He's not that guy. Lorenzo Alexander, he's their starting Sam backer. This week he was a starting linebacker, played more as a will. But I think when you look at Lorenzo Alexander, the thing they'll do with him is they'll bring him up to the line of scrimmage.
He's their joker.
Off the edge, or they'll stand him up at 3 technique.
Yeah,
there was a play
joker.
a few games ago. It's 2nd and 1.
Yeah.
And he's lined up as a 3 technique with his standing up.
No
and I'm like,
question.
What are we doing offensively that we're not running the ball
There's
right now?
a player who, believe it or not, I watched coming out of college who they're trying to see if he can become an edge rusher, and that's Darrell Johnson, number 92,
from
North Carolina A&T,
yeah.
who I actually watched in college. I don't know if you did.
I did. Flies around.
And I kind of liked him as a potential guy.
Yeah.
And he had a very good preseason, and they're giving him meaningful snaps, and he's not there yet.
Sure.
But I think they're hoping maybe he can become the guy. Look, Jerry Hughes, he's a 10-year player too. So, but let's just turn to linebacker real quick because Tremaine Edwards is a freakish athlete who's much, much better this year than he was a year ago. Much better.
So I didn't watch him last year, so I can't speak to it.
Last year, he really struggled with recognition.
And that was his issue at Virginia Tech.
Yeah. He's much better this year.
Okay.
Nat Milano was inactive this week. Don't know what his status is for this week.
Yep.
One of my favorite players to watch on tape.
Did you watch him in Boston College?
A little bit, not as much as I wanted to.
Yeah, he was athletic. They used him a lot of different ways. They moved him around.
He played because I believe Don Brown was in Boston College at the time.
Early on. Yep. I don't think he was there his final year.
But he played the Jabril Peppers role
Yeah.
at Boston College. That Peppers played for Brown at Michigan.
Yep.
And I really like Matt Milano. I think he's not overlooked. The Eagles coaching staff, coaching staffs won't be overlooking him
from a media standpoint.
But he's a really good player.
Yep.
He's fast. He's active. He's disruptive. He can cover backs. He can cover tight ends. He's a good player.
Just going to go through numbers really quick, and we'll kind of go out on this. Opposing quarterback rating, they're third in the NFL, 70.3. Completion percentage, fourth in the NFL, under 59%. Yards per attempt, third in the NFL, 5.92. 20-plus completions, 14,
Very
third in
few.
the NFL. 20-plus pass touchdowns, goose egg, 0, leads the NFL. Third and third down sacks with 9. They're not a high-volume blitz team, but they have a variety of blitz
Just
packages.
to wrap up, here's what we should say about this defense.
Yeah.
They are so fundamentally sound and execution efficient. That's what they hang their hat on. They look, is a guy going to give up a play here and there? Of course, that happens.
Yep.
But they are so fundamentally, they just don't make mistakes. And that's a function, I think, of Sean McDermott and Leslie Frazier, another name people will remember in Philly, who's the DC.
There are a lot of familiar names up there.
A lot of familiar names on that staff. And they're just really, really sound in everything they do. You just don't see mistakes where you go, what was going on there?
Yep. No, it's a good team. This is not like in years past, like, going up to Buffalo, let's go get a win.
And people still see them that way, and especially because they lost to New England, although they did not get blown out in a 16-10. They lost because their offense, because Josh Allen was overmatched in that
Against
game
a good New England
by
defense,
arguably the best man-to-man defense in the league in New England. But their defense held down the Patriots, as, by the way, they normally do.
Yeah, no, it's a good team. It's going to be a big test.
Yeah.
Excited to break it down with you next week right here on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. Greg, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Fran.
Well, great stuff from Greg, and you can follow him on Twitter just like I do, at Greg Cosell. And while you're at it, I'm at FDuffy3. That's where I post all the podcasts I'm a part of and all of our X's and O's content that we produce at PhiladelphiaEagles.com. And you know how much I appreciate everybody that promotes this podcast on any form of social media. That is the best way. Well, that's one way to support the show. Not the best way. The best way is to go onto Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, leave us a rating and leave us a comment. I can't tell you how happy I am with the listeners of this show, and they just consistently go on, leave ratings, leave questions. I can't even keep up and make sure I give all of you guys the love on the show each week. So I'm just going to give a couple more people some love here. Chris from SLC left a 5-star review and a question saying, I was wondering if the Eagles did make a trade for a corner, what type of corner would make the most impact in Jim Schwartz's scheme? And Chris, that's a good question. I get it a lot, whether it's on Apple Podcasts or on Twitter. And I think really when you look at this Eagles scheme, and I think most schemes now, look, the NFL, it's gone are the days where you can be the Tampa Bay Bucks under Tony Dungy, the Indianapolis Colts under Tony Dungy, and just play one coverage time after time after time after time again. You've got to be able to play man coverage. You've got to be able to play zone coverage. You've got to be able to play single high. You've got to be able to play two high. You've got to be able to mix things up, and the Eagles do. The Eagles mix things up. You'll see cover 1, cover 2, cover 3, cover 4, all sorts of man coverages, all sorts of zone coverages, blitz coverages, everything in the book. So to me, from a scheme standpoint, that stuff's out the window in today's NFL. And just in my opinion, of course, there are some players that are better accustomed to play in heavy zone schemes as opposed to some that are more accustomed to play in heavy man. But you've got to be able to do both in today's NFL. So to me, it's not a question of that. I think really you look, and just goes to every player on that side of the ball. This is an aggressive defense. It's an aggressive scheme. It's a one-gap scheme. So you've got to be able to attack downhill. You've got to be able to make stops in the run game. You're going to be relied on to manhandle your gap. One gap means one player for one gap. So you've got to be able to hold that gap. So any player, corner, safety, linebacker, defensive end, defensive tackle, you've got to be able to hold your own at the point of attack in this scheme. That's obviously one of the most important traits. So, if it's not talking about, you need corners that are 220 pounds and you need safeties that are 230, it's about competitiveness and having that edge and that that willingness to be able to come downhill and play in those gaps. So any position on the defensive side of the ball, I think that's really what you're looking for. You want guys that have that hard edge, and a lot of the guys that they've brought in over the course of the last few years, if you go back, and watch them in college, that was part of their skill set. That was one of the things that they brought to the table, and I think that's something you'll consistently see here in Philadelphia. All right, and then the last one I want to just give love to. There wasn't a question with this one, but I also wanted to thank Chapo DeBaz, who left a 5-star review saying how much they love the show. So great stuff from both of you. Thank you, and appreciate everybody out there for listening to this podcast and all of our podcasts on PhiladelphiaEagles.com. Before I get to my notes on Tre'Davious White, I want to quickly just remind you that if you want to get notes on some of the future stars of the NFL, they might be Eagles as well, make sure you tune in over to the Journey to the Draft podcast. Every single week, we are breaking down the top prospects in college football in preparation for next year's NFL draft. I can't tell you, when we finished this past draft in April, and we talked about Andre Dillard and Miles Sanders and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside and the players that the Eagles were able to acquire, and you look around the division, a lot of the players that every team was able to acquire, we talked about all these guys, not just in the spring, not just around Combine time or Senior Bowl time, but we were talking about Andre Dillard, who just made his first start this past week. We talked about it earlier in the show. We were talking about Andre Dillard over a year ago, last September. Myself and Ben Fennell, we're talking about Andre Dillard, the sleeper offensive tackle out in the West Coast that not a lot of people were talking about in the media, but certainly could be a guy that could be viewed as a riser. What does he do? He goes up, helps himself every step along the way, and turns into a first-round pick. So if you want to get a heads up on next year's draft, get a head start against all of your friends and everybody that you want to be able to talk about college football with and the NFL draft with in the spring, make sure you go tune in to the Journey to the Draft podcast each and every week. All right, well, let's get to a player that we talked a lot about on the Journey to the Draft podcast in that spring of 2017. It's time to hear my notes on Tre'Davious White when he came out of LSU.
Dim those lights. We're headed to the film room for the scouting report.
All right, so Tre'Davious White, again, a player that I was a big fan of when he was coming out of the Bayou Bengals, a 4-year starter. I actually studied him the last 3 years, I should say, that he played there for LSU. Started almost every game. First he played nickel corner. He played outside corner, right corner, left corner. Also played some safety. Was moved all around the formation there. Slid out to left corner and base as a senior, but he spent most of their time in their sub package on the inside as a senior. Played both spots. He would travel with receivers. I know he did that against Laquan Treadwell, who was a first-round pick. He did it with Darunya Wilson, who was one of the best receivers in the SEC. He was Dak Prescott's number one target when they were at Mississippi State together. So when you look at Tre'Davious White, he was counted on to be that alpha, that number one corner for LSU, who has always got a talented secondary. Slightly undersized, but I thought he had pretty good length, and he had the ability to play press coverage, but he really appeared to play mirror press, where maybe he wasn't using that length to disrupt early in the down, but with his feet, he was able to stay on top of receivers, stay in their hip pocket. At the Combine, he didn't test great. He tested okay, but I thought the film showed a guy that was able to get in and out of breaks really quickly. He played faster than he timed. I thought that was really consistent watching him all 3 years. I didn't not once have a question about his athletic ability, about whether or not he could be a starter in the NFL, and I think some people questioned that after his Combine testing. That was not something that I ever worried about watching Tre'Davious. He rarely had issues staying in the hip pocket of SEC wide receivers, showed more discipline at the line of scrimmage as he continued to get older in his career, knew where his help was, consistently showed a good feel for playing the position, whether it was man or zone. I thought he had that scheme versatility, had the instincts, the route recognition skills to be able to break on throws, read the quarterback in zone, and make plays on the football. Along the sideline, I remember him making numerous plays down the field where he showed a really good ability to press receivers towards the sideline, get his eyes up, and find the football. Again, just a guy I was really impressed with his ball skills, ability to be very, very productive. Only allowed 3 big plays in all of 2016, 2 penalties. Really, really good job of limiting the big play and also not drawing a lot of flags. I thought he was just really, really impressive all the way around. It was a great run defender. One of my notes, he lives on the island where bubble screens go to die. Repeatedly just came downhill, made stops in the flat, just a really competitive, edgy player that I really loved his play personality. He was a good blitzer from the slot and from the boundary as well. So a guy that to me was just very, very well-rounded and didn't fly. He wasn't going to be a guy that was going to run 4.3. He wasn't 6'2", didn't have 33-inch arms, but to me just had a really good knack for playing the position. My only concerns really, at times his press technique left a little bit to be desired. At times he would open the gate up a little bit too quick quickly, so allow a receiver to get upfield uninhibited. That was something I saw a little bit from him on tape. True burners, I thought, might be able to give him some trouble. So, a Deshaun Jackson type, a Tyreek Hill type, anybody that can just get to top speed immediately might give him trouble, as they do for most corners in the NFL. But overall, I thought this was my final summary on Tre'Davious White. A bit undersized, but an instinctive player with really good ball skills and a competitive streak. He's a good run defender. He can play any coverage you need him to. He's got the physical tools that maybe aren't through the roof. There's no jaw-dropping athletic traits, as I mentioned, but he makes up for it in the mental side of the game. I think he can start day one, and I think he's got multiple Pro Bowls in his future. A high-floor player as a do-everything slot guy, but I thought he could be a starter and a 3-down player for an NFL secondary. He's turned into one of the best young corners in the NFL. The interception he had down in the red zone this week against Miami, to me, really painted a picture of the kind of player he was. He was an off coverage, read the route break, jumped it, made a great play on the football. He was targeted 5 times. They clearly, if you just go onto Twitter and search for Ryan Fitzpatrick's the passing chart, the little flow chart that they'll post showing where all of his targets went this year or this week against the Buffalo, everything was to the left. They completely stayed away from the right side of the field. He was targeted 5 times. He got a pick. He forced a fumble and was able to get a pass breakup. Nearly had another interception. So I think when you look at Tre'Davious White, this guy's really instinctive. Everything that I saw at LSU has carried over to the Buffalo Bills, and he's turned into a great player for Sean McDermott. It's a great fit for that scheme because it is a zone-heavy scheme, and I do think he was a little bit better of a zone player, but as I mentioned, and as we've talked about numerous times in the show already, you have to be able to play all coverages, and he showed the ability to be a man coverage player. All right, that'll do it. Another show in the books here on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. For everybody here at the NovaCare Complex, I'm Fran Duffy. We will talk to you next week.